Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of You Complain and We Explain. And today I want to talk to you about a very sensitive subject. It has to do with all of the comments that we get that say, Jonathan, stop touching the marine life. Everybody knows that you shouldn't touch the marine life. Well, it's a complicated discussion, you guys. So I'm going to start with a story. So if you have little kids and you go into a store that has a lot of fragile stuff, most parents are going to say to the kids, they're going to say, hey, you guys, don't touch anything. All right? Now, the reason they do that, obviously, is because they recognize that young children don't know the difference between something that's fragile that they might break and something that's not fragile that they probably won't break. So it's easier to just say, don't touch anything, okay? But when the kids are older, like when they're teenagers and you go into the same store, you're not gonna tell your 17-year-old, don't touch anything. I mean, you're gonna recognize that older people are gonna know the difference between what's fragile and what isn't fragile, and they can probably figure it out. So obviously, different people in the same store behave slightly differently. So now let's talk about divers. When people first get certified to dive, we tell them, don't touch anything, okay? We treat them like small children, scuba divers. And the reason is because they don't know the difference between things that will hurt them and things that won't hurt them. Things that they could harm by touching them and things that they probably won't harm by touching them. Let's just say that after a while, most divers, if they dive enough, start to learn a lot about marine life. Now, I've been diving for 30 years. I don't want to brag, but I have more practical experience with marine life in the ocean than most marine biologists on the planet. I have spent thousands of hours underwater photographing and filming marine life, and I am intimately familiar with almost all forms of marine life that most divers would encounter. And that being said, I have more experience with being able to handle marine life or touch things than the average diver. So yes, you will hear people say, oh, divers should never touch anything. But that's what you get, that's what you start with. And then from there, you use your experience to know what is safe to touch and what is not safe to touch. So I can look at some examples and sort of my philosophy on what I'm gonna allow myself to touch and what I'm not. So I'm swimming along on a reef and there's a sea turtle rubbing its shell on the coral, just like doing a back rub. Now I can tell by looking at this animal has an itchy shell. This turtle would love a back scratch, right? So I go over and I give the turtle a back scratch and it obviously likes it because it stays there and it's enjoying it and it's not swimming away. I don't look for opportunities to touch the marine life, but when the marine life obviously wants to be touched, if it's trying to touch me, which I've had dolphins, manatees, turtles, whales, all manner of animals actually come up and rub against me for attention. You can tell in that case that they actually want to be touched. And in that case, I don't think it's really a problem. Here's the thing you need to understand. Just about everything in the ocean can outswim a scuba diver. We are about the slowest thing in the ocean, except for maybe a jellyfish. So anything, a sea turtle, a fish, a dolphin, any animal that I am likely to try to touch, if it doesn't want to be touched, it can immediately be out of range of touch just like that, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, it's pretty hard to harass marine life just with a pair of fins and a scuba tank. It's pretty difficult. So the marine life usually decides whether an encounter like that is going to happen. And if they allow it to happen, then you shouldn't be worried about whether I'm distressing the animal. Now, I can give another example. I was once at a dive club meeting and I was showing some photographs. And one of the images that I showed was a pufferfish that was puffed up and it had all of its little spines sticking out. And someone in the audience afterwards, read me the riot act because obviously I had to harass that animal to get it to puff. So pufferfish do puff up as a defense response. And yes, I mean, to get a shot of a pufferfish puffed, you have to probably corner it. You have to do something to make it a little bit stressed out so that it'll puff for a picture. And you don't want to do that too often because the poor thing, you don't want to be doing that. But I mean, that is what the animal does. That's its defense mechanism. That is what it is built to do to defend itself. It does not hurt a pufferfish to puff up. That is what they do. I mean, it's just like a skunk squirting or a porcupine, throwing some quills. That's what they're designed to do. Who knows? Maybe they need a little exercise now and then doing it. I don't know. But yeah, that could be borderline considered bothering the marine life. But the point that I want to make here is that the woman that was dressing me down for having done this was eating shrimp cocktail at the time. And so I kind of like to point out, I don't eat marine life. I have a professional relationship with the fish. I say fish are friends, not food. But my professional relationship with the fish is that I don't eat them and they don't eat me. And for 30 years, it's been working out great. I have not been eaten by any marine life. So I'm going to go with that. And my attitude kind of is, if you eat seafood of any type, you don't have the right to tell me that I'm harassing the marine life, because guess what? You're eating them, and harassing them's not as bad as eating them. So I'm just going to throw that right out there. Any of my viewers that want to give a comment about how I should not be harassing the marine life, I want you to turn around and look at yourself and ask yourself, what kind of harassment is it to actually eat them? And it is not an excuse to say they were already dead. That does not work, because if you stop eating them, there will be less people that have a demand for them, and there will be less demand on fishing them. And it all starts with somebody, and that somebody is you. So I'm here to tell you that if you really care about marine life, don't worry about someone who's scratching the back of the turtle. Worry about what you're eating. I got another good story for you. So one time I came out of a dive, and when I got back on the dive boat, someone on the boat told me that they saw me kneeling on the sand, and I shouldn't kneel on the sand because of all the little creatures that I could potentially kill. And I had to laugh because I said to the woman, do you walk across your lawn? I mean, do you know how many bugs you kill when you walk across your lawn? Let's just not be ridiculous here, okay? Like, there are certain things underwater that are okay, and kneeling on the sand is okay, okay? Now, there are some things you should not touch. There are things that I never touch. I have a couple rules on this. One, you should never touch an animal that can't get away. So like a seahorse, like an animal that can't really get away from you, you should never touch them. That is harassing the marine life. You should never touch an animal that would be harmed by touching them, like coral. You shouldn't touch the coral reef. You shouldn't touch sponges, things that if you touch them, you'll hurt them or break them or something like that. You shouldn't touch that stuff, definitely not. And you definitely shouldn't touch things that can bite you or sting you. So you shouldn't be touching a blue-ringed octopus or a scorpion fish or stuff like that, because that's just, bad idea. If you touch those and you get stung or bitten, well, you deserved it. Last thing, sometimes in videos, you'll see me like with 2 fingers on the reef trying to steady myself for a shot. And this is a very common thing that underwater photographers do so that they can maintain control in a confined, closed spot, like so that you don't get pushed into the coral by, a wave. And so if you have like 2 fingers on the reef, you can stabilize. But any good underwater photographer that knows what they're doing, they're putting their fingers on a dead part of the reef. Not the entire reef isn't alive. There's live coral and there's dead coral, and there's dead coral that's overgrown with algae. Not every part of a reef is coral. And in fact, on an average reef, at least half of the coral is older coral that's dead, that's not alive. And so you don't touch the live coral, obviously. You put your fingers on a dead part of the reef, or maybe a part of the reef that's just got some algae on it or whatever. And by doing that, you're actually doing the right thing, because you're keeping yourself from being accidentally smashed into the reef by a wave or surge, by maintaining that control. So just because you see someone putting a finger on the reef doesn't mean that they're touching the coral. And I like to point that out to people. That is a thing that we do to help, not to hurt. So that's about all I can think of for this video on touching things underwater. And I hope you've enjoyed this latest edition of You Complain, We Explain. And I'll see you next time when your comments bring me here. So I'm not saying to keep complaining, but if you have to, do. Until next time, later.